Everybody, hello and welcome back to In the Mixer as we continue our season preview series in the build-up to the first games of the Hyundai A-League season. Today we're going to be doing Brisbane Roar, and I'm joined by the wonderful Colby List, who will be previewing their season for us. Colby, how are you, man?
G'day, Sean. Yeah, very well. How you going?
Yeah, not too bad. Nothing to complain about. And I think after watching sort of the last round of friendlies take place in the last 24, 48 hours for most clubs, the hype train has definitely left the station for the A-League season.
Did you say the hype train or the bolt train?
The hype train. I'm not on board with the bolt train just yet, but we can talk about him a little bit further. Obviously, overnight he had a pretty decent performance, albeit against lower league opposition, in what really was his last chance, I think, to secure a contract. But we'll go through him a little bit further down the page. Brisbane Roar, of course, foundation club in the Hyundai A-League, initially starting out as Queensland Roar, wearing that tremendous bright orange, blue and white kit in the early days of the league itself. Two-time premiers in 2010, 2011 and 2013, 2014, and three-time grand final champions in 2011, 2012 and 2014. Colby, what are some of your favourite memories of both those premierships and championships, albeit, you know, how good that Brisbane side was for a long period in the earlier part of this decade?
Yeah, I think you've recapped a lot of the great times there. Obviously, one of my great memories is the 2011 championship where we came back in extra time to defeat Central Coast Mariners. That was definitely a game for the ages, not only in Brisbane Roar history but in A-League history as well. It was spine-tingling stuff, but there've been plenty of other great memories along the way as well.
Yeah, excellent. So tell us a little bit more about your history with Brisbane Roar. When did you initially start as a fan of the club? We are now into the 14th season of the A-League, so not everyone, I've kind of realised very quickly, has been involved since foundation. Tell us a bit about your background with the team and what made you fall in love with it.
Yeah, so when I was living in Brisbane, I'm living in Melbourne at the moment. When I was in Brisbane around the time of the inception of the A-League, I was sort of a casual fan at that time. I used to go to games at Suncorp with my dad every now and again, sort of, you know, probably a couple of times a season. We'd get down to a game, watch a few on TV. But it was really not until I moved down to Melbourne and sort of everything was foreign down here. There's a lot of AFL going on, where I was really just craving some more Brisbane in my life and really sort of fell in love with the club from a distance.
Yeah, it is tough to get kind of caught in that AFL bubble, particularly down here when you think of, you know, the major media outlets, and I'm sure further down the track we'll do a whole episode on, you know, media coverage of the A-League and how it works, but obviously
very interesting one in Melbourne, that one.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of the prime network television stations and newspapers have such a vested interest in AFL that trying to get that exposure down here is always really tough. I think the best example that I've seen is Melbourne Victory winning the grand final last year was surmised as like a half-page article on page 57 of the Herald Sun, whereas, you know, the pre-season competition for the AFL had a full 15 pages dedicated to it. So it's an interesting one and a unique one down here, and I don't really envy you trying to be a Brisbane fan and get up-to-date information, but of course the advent of the internet does make it easy to access our clubs directly.
Yeah, absolutely. But I could definitely join you and talk for quite a long time about the treatment of football in the media down here generally. But definitely one for another time. Yeah,
for sure. So the Backry Group have owned the Brisbane Roar since 2014. What has been, obviously there's been ups and downs with that. Really, I think they came into the league as the first real foreign ownership group. At the time, it was very exciting to see sort of, not a global reach because they are an Indonesian-based consortium and they are one of our nearest geographical neighbours. But the idea of foreign ownership in sporting clubs is very unique to the A-League environment. It's come with its downs as well, which we can talk about a little bit further. What's your read on the Backry Group and how they've done in their tenureship?
The Backry Group are probably not my favourite football ownership group, and being a Raw fan, I'd probably prefer to see a change in ownership. But having said that, we are sort of in a period now where that seems to have been a little bit on the back burner after a relatively good off-season, which I'm sure we'll talk about as well. fingers crossed that the things are moving forward in a positive way with the Bakery Group. David Poor's returned to the club after in a second stint as sort of managing director of the club after resigning sort of 12 months before he came back due to frustrations with the Backeries. So hopefully that's a good indicator that things are on the right foot with them again. But all you can sort of do at the moment is hope for the best, because you never really know what the foreign owners, or what any ownership group, to be honest, are really thinking and what their plans are for the club. Sometimes, all you can do is guess.
Yeah, I do. I agree with you in that sense. I think they have done a lot of good things in the last 12, 18 months that maybe make you think they are past a lot of the issues that have raised their head. You know, a lot of the issues that they've caused within that environment. But there is always that kind of looming cloud, and you wonder how quick the hair trigger is for some of those past poor experiences or past issues with payments and whatever else to rear their head. So it'll be interesting to see how the next 12 months plays out, and how tied it is to performance on and off the pitch.
Absolutely.
All right, so looking at the last 5 league positions, obviously 13-14 we did highlight earlier as being a championship and premiership winning season, finishing the league on top. And then in 14-15, a kind of relative slide down to 6th spot. 15-16, a 3rd place finish. Backed that up again in 3rd in 16-17. And last season, 6th in the league with a preliminary final loss. Sorry, just clearing the throat. So what was one of your season highlights from last year? Obviously not a bad finish in that you made finals football, but you did really kind of just scrape in there towards the end in 6th spot.
Yeah, that's right. And last season there were highlights for the Roar who were few and far between. My highlight, I guess, for last season would be beating Melbourne Victory away at Amy Park. Obviously, being a Roar fan in Melbourne, there are only sort of about 3 away games where the Roar feature in Melbourne per year. And so you've got to make sure you get to those. But our form in the past couple of seasons on the road, particularly in Melbourne, has been pretty abysmal, and we're used to sort of walking away with no points, and very happy Melburnians on the way home. But yeah, we got the job done this last season against the Victory away, and it was a pretty good time in a season of a lot of stuff going wrong.
What was your experience? What have been your experiences of the away section at Amy Park? Obviously, it took down in Melbourne a long time to get a rectangular stadium or a specialised football stadium. What are the experiences like as an away fan?
Yeah, look, it's pretty decent. A lot of the time there are not that many away fans there, as I'm sure you've seen, and you can see on TV every now and again when the camera cuts to the away fans, depending on the fan group, obviously.
Yeah, mate, I'm a City fan, so sometimes there aren't that many home fans there.
Yeah, often as well. But when we do get good numbers, it's quite a good place to be. We're sort of tucked away in the corner a little bit in the away section at Amy Park, where, you know, if you're a sort of football purist, it's not the best place to actually watch the game, but it's you can't really go wrong in Amy Park. It's you're right there on the touchline, and it's close to all of the action, and the players sort of come and get around us at the end of the game, and we have a chat, and after sort of screaming for 90 minutes and singing and all the rest of it. So it's a pretty good time. Yeah,
always easy to sing and chant and down a pint when you're beating Victory as well. So good to hear. And I think, like, I've travelled a couple of times. I haven't yet done the Suncorp trip, but I've been to McDonald Jones, I've been to Cooper's, I've been up to Allianz, and obviously the Etihad, or now Marvel Stadium derbies that we have. I think Amy Park, when it's full and has a big crowd in it, is as good as any other football stadium around the country. So it's great to finally have more venues like that available to the round ball game. Okay, so we've looked at the positive and one of your personal season highlights. What was your greatest frustration for the 17-18 season?
There are a lot of frustrations for the 2017-18 season. Obviously, it kicked off with losing sort of players who were reaching their peak, Jamie McLaren and Brandon Borello, departing at the start of the 2017-18 season, or the end of the 16-17 season. But the one of the biggest frustrations, obviously, was the season was the Dad's Army season, in which we brought in a number of you could say, very experienced players, including 38-year-old Massimo Macarone. We brought in Fahid Ben Khalfallah from the Victory, as well as Franich and Enrique making their return to the club, all sort of on the wrong side of 35-ish. And that sort of resulted in particularly bad performances and results. In particular, we had a really bad home result. We had really bad home performances and results last season. We had sort of 4 wins at home for the season, which was
and for such a long
bit
time,
of a frustration.
And for such a long time, it really was Fortress Suncorp, and it was a place that nobody really went to expecting to get more than a point. So such a weird role reversal to see that play out last year.
Yeah, very frustrating. And to top it off, we had shirt tape gate in the Asian Champions League group stage qualifier against the Filipino side, Ceres Negros. In which a number of the numbers on the back of the Roar players' shirts started peeling off, which basically caused stoppages in play, shamed the league, and produced a lot of memes.
Oh, I don't think that meme train will ever finish. They'll always... I don't think it would matter if you won the league this season and had pictures of you holding up the toilet seat. Someone will still find a way to Photoshop in numbers falling off the back of players' jerseys as they're accepting their awards. So
yeah, the fans have all embraced it anyway. So
yeah,
we've had to just cop that one and take ownership of it.
Sometimes it's useless pushing back. You just got to lean into it. Like, I've got to lean into the Green Seed Elite thing. Otherwise, I'm going to get torn apart in the comment section every single week.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on to the FFA Cup results and pre-season friendlies. Obviously in the FFA Cup, playing Melbourne City, eliminated in the round of 32 to 120th minute Bruno Fornaroli wonder goal. Very much a game, like I'll speak now as a City fan, very much a game that looked like a pre-season friendly. And you can kind of see in the way the pacing of the game went. Either side really could have found a winner. It was just that sort of a scrappy contest that could have gone either way. What were your thoughts as a Brisbane fan?
I agree. I think it was a deserving winner. It was a great goal to pull that out at the 120th minute. Deserved winners, City in that game. I mean, it's just like the Roar to face an A-League side in the round of 32 of the FFA Cup, and to be eliminated by that A-League side in the round of 32 in the FFA Cup. So. I don't think the Roar fans were at all surprised by that result. Good game. Would have been nice to go further, but we actually had a number of other pre-season friendlies lined up. I think the club's done a good job of setting those up, and a number against A-League opposition as well. So
yeah, I do have the stat line here. Undefeated so far against lower league and A-League opposition. Only 1 win, but 4 pretty credible draws, and most of them are scoring draws as well, which is interesting to see. I think the big one that keeps coming up as we do these season previews is the differences in terms of finances between the top 3 financial clubs. So I'm talking about the likes of Sydney FC, Melbourne Victory, and Melbourne City, who, because of their backing or because of their financial clout, they have the ability to pay full 12-month contracts and can pay an extra few weeks or extra few months wages to get the majority of their squad, like their first 17, 18, 19, 20 players there and training since before the round of 32 in the FFA Cup. It'll be interesting to see how different that Brisbane lineup is from the start of that FFA Cup game to what actually lines up in round 1, given that the majority of their business was still due to take place in the transfer window.
Yeah, that's right. We've had a number come in, but thankfully we've got all but one spot in the squad filled now. So everyone's together, but before kickoff, and everyone who is there has had more or less a complete pre-season, and we're looking pretty good this season. It'll be interesting to see, how we line up and how we look in round 1, whether we're sort of ready to jump out of the blocks or not.
Mm. Well, we do now get to go through the interesting portion. We'll start with the players out and that have left the club. The first being the left back, Corey Brown, has moved to Melbourne Victory. What were your thoughts on him and the way that his move was a bit contracted? It kind of ran through a lot of the second half of last season.
Yeah, that's right. This did go down for a lot of last season. It was no surprise to anybody who's a fan of the Roar that Corey did leave. He'd been wanting to make a move back down to Melbourne for a while, and that happened in the off season. He was a bit of a fan favourite, and I think he will be missed by certain sections of the Roar fans. But I mean, yeah, he's really a sort of solid A-League left back at best. He was definitely developing season on season at the Roar, but yeah, I think there are others at the club who will happily do a good job in slotting into his place, namely Connor O'Toole.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a couple of players, and we'll talk about Connor O'Toole and a few others a little bit further down that definitely have high potential that should have a few more opportunities with some of the outs that we've seen. The next one being Mitch Oxborough, who joined, I believe, at the start of last season from Perth, has now returned to NPL football to try and get some consistency and some minutes. What did you make of him?
Yeah, he showed sort of flashes of promise last season when he was at the Raw, and he was one of those ones that you sort of didn't know whether he was going to kick on or not. Not too sure whether, if he'd been offered a contract, he would have kicked on and really made the step up. But like you say, with A-League clubs who aren't in the top three in terms of financings, there's and with limited squad numbers in the A-League, there's only so long you can give these kinds of players to sort of step up and perform, and that includes visa players as well. A lot of players are only on 1-year deals in most A-League clubs, other than the sort of three that you mentioned earlier. So yeah, we'll never know. And I don't know, maybe he'll have a great season in the NPL and come back and be given another lifeline by another club. But yeah, not too sure.
Yeah, there's within the A-League and the structure, you have to have at least 5 players under the age of 23, and then you also need to have, I think it's 3 players now that have been trained by the club that are either youth players on scholarships or whatever else in your squad of 23. So I think the 2 milestone ages are turning 21, which Mitch Oxborough now has, and then 23, where you're no longer included amongst that quota or included amongst that cap, where if you aren't ready and playing, starting 11 football each week, it can be tough to take up a squad space in such a constrained environment. So I think Mitch Oxborough, and he's not the only one, we've seen him from all the clubs that we've previewed so far, is probably definitely a casualty of that. But if he kicks on at the NPL level, I don't see any reason why a club wouldn't come in and look at him again during the next off-season. The next one is Ivan Franic has gone to Perth, obviously such a tremendous part of those title-winning seasons at Brisbane Roar. What did you make of his return and also now him leaving?
Yeah, I thought his return was quite sentimental. Yeah, being a bit of a legend at the club, but he's now, I'm not sure, maybe 34, 35, maybe older. So I guess that's pretty. I'm pretty okay with him leaving for Perth. He was part of that clear out of a lot of the over 30s brigade that we had this off season. So. Yeah, I mean, good to see him continuing his career. If that's clearly what he wants to do, is extend his club career a little bit more. So that's great for him. But yeah, I think we're okay in that position as well.
Yeah, the next one is Corey Gamero, who has had a pretty torrid time with injuries. He initially came through the youth system at Fulham over in the UK before returning to Sydney FC and starting very brightly before injuries curtailed his career a little bit. He then joined Melbourne City and then has gone up to Brisbane and has now been released and picked up again by the Central Coast. We kind of touched on this in our preview for Central Coast Mariners, and if you're a listener, you will have to tune into that one to get the full story. But I thought it was very interesting to see the comparison between Mitch Oxborough going to a National Premier League level to get minutes, when in reality Corey Gamero, given his injury history, could probably really do with a full NPL season where he gets confidence back in his body and gets over his injury curses, rather than going straight back into the high pace of another A-League side. What was your read on his contribution to Brisbane Roar and your thoughts on his move to Central Coast?
Well, look, my view is that he's definitely too good for the NPL. He's a quality player. It didn't happen for him at the Roar. We sort of did rehab him for most of the season last year after sort of picking him up from City. And he did play a number of games for us, but it was just one of those things where it just didn't happen for him, and the Aloises were very sympathetic to that. Look, I hope he stays fit at Central Coast, and I hope he gets games.
He has a great reputation as being one of the better blokes around football clubs, and I think that's why he consistently gets these
Yeah.
opportunities. So I don't mean, like, obviously, fan of the show, Corey Gamero, if you're listening, please feel free to come on and correct both Colby and myself. But I think it was just more when he first came back with City, he got immediately injured again. And then when he did his rehab and came back through with Brisbane, he looked a little bit fearful that his body was going to give out on him. And sort of that explosive pace that he had when he first burst on the scene, it's obviously tough to get back when you're working back from long-term injuries, particularly with ACLs and knees and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, and that would definitely contribute to it.
So the next one is old father time. Massimo Macarone signed as a marquee last season on a one-year deal. 38 years old. He is back playing in Italy. He's going to go again for another season, well and truly into his 39th year in the Serie C. What was your read on Big Mass and how he led the line last year?
I was very surprised at how well he did in the Roar last year. I think he was one of the players last season who played the most minutes for the club. And I mean, yeah, he got 10 goals in all competitions. He was the top scorer on 10 goals in all competitions, and that says more about our season than it really does about him, I think. But yeah, he's obviously a really classy player, but he's obviously a really classy player who was 38 last year. So, and he was trying to slot into a team that was, trying to play him in transitions like Jamie McLaren used to do, and his body just wasn't up to it, and he's not the same kind of player as McLaren is. But I rated him. I was very down on the signing of Macaroni when we got him in, given his age. But yeah, I was quite pleased with how he did, given how the rest of the team performed around him.
Yeah, it's a weird one to say, but I actually thought he did well, but the team didn't do well enough, bringing him into games enough. I think
exactly. Yeah, that's what I mean.
I think you hit the nail on the head getting away from, that team that had the pace and counter-attacking style with the likes of Jamie McLaren, Brandon Borello, Tommy Orr in recent years. They still tried to play at that accelerated style, albeit with a very different lineup and a much older lineup, as we've already kind of noted. So it's weird to say. I think he did very well, but I just don't think it was the right environment tactically for him to thrive and do any more than he actually did. So, yeah, probably I don't think a marquee player in terms of his output. But, yeah, not a bad signing, and I don't think he had a bad season either. The next one, another club legend moving on from the club, Michael Theo. He has been released. I don't know if he's officially retired yet or if he intends to play NPL football a little bit further. Obviously, there has been a bit of a back and forward between he and Jamie Young for the Brisbane Roar goalkeeping spot, and Jamie Young looks like he will be relatively unchallenged for the season ahead. What are some of your fondest memories of Michael Theo and his time at the Roar?
I mean, Theo, I was in the Jamie Young, Michael Theo days competing for spots. I was always Team Theo. I really rated him as a keeper, as a shot stopper. I think it's the right time for him to go, and I think it's right. I think it's a good thing for Jamie Young for him to go, because Youngie's a real keeper who sort of thrives on confidence, as a lot of goalkeepers are, but Jamie Young especially. I think Theo will definitely go down in Brisbane Roar memory as one of the legends of the club.
Yeah, and I think it's very unique in a lot of these environments, because if you are proven quality and you get along with the management group and whatever else, sometimes it sucks when you see a player that has to be pushed rather than goes at the right time or goes of their own accord or anything like that. I think a great comparison, if you're looking overall at Australian football, is the way that Mark Viduka just kind of gracefully bowed out of the game. Whereas, we've seen quite a few older players just try and continue and pursue their careers. So I do hope Michael Theo either returns to NPL football if he wants to continue playing, or alternatively, he retires gracefully and goes from there. It'd be a shame to see him donning the kit for another team or joining them as squad depth or anything like that. The other one is Jade North, who has been a pretty tremendous servant for Brisbane in the last few years. I think he's now 37 years old, so another one certainly that time has... You can look at it two ways. He was still doing backflip goal celebrations at 35 years old, so I don't know if we could really throw him in the same boat as a Michael Theo or a Mass Macarone, but is it just a case of time running out for him, or do you think Jade North potentially could have been held on to for another year?
Yeah, look, I think he might have had another season in him, though I do think we have some depth in that position now. But yeah, I think it was the right time for him to go. Another legend of the club, who came down from the North Queensland Fury, and made a name for himself in Brisbane. Yeah, I think it was the right call for him to go at this time.
Yeah, I think you're right there. And the last one, we did already touch on him a little bit earlier. Fahid Ben Khalfallah, initially retired, but he's back playing NPL football, I think, still with Nunawading City. He may have retired again and just is hanging around Crown Casino in Melbourne. But what were your thoughts on his contribution last year? He did get a decent wage packet, and obviously won the league in his time at Melbourne Victory as well.
I think I'm in the unpopular opinion among Roar fans of I was quite a fan of him. I think he had a good season, and for a 35-ish-year-old, I think he looked quite energetic on the pitch at a lot of the times. His work rate was quite good. I was surprised by that, and I think he was actually having to put in a little bit more to sort of compensate for the low work rate, quite frankly, of a lot of players around him. So I mean, I was happy with his output. He started the season really strong. He did fade off towards the end of the season last year, and I think again it's probably the right time for him to be moved on as John Aloisi looks to sort of rebalance the squad in terms of ages. But yeah, I was happy with his season.
Yeah, very much. You could probably say similar things to him as we did about Massimo Macaroni, that perhaps the team was looking for him to play more of a Brandon Borello style on the wing in a front three.
Yep.
But like on paper, you look at kind of the front three, the way it lined up last year, Bortiak, Ben Khalfallah, Macaroni, that's a really high quality squad if you're playing football that suits them. And for everything negative that's been said about Ben Khalfallah, I think the one thing that he'd probably agree with as well is you can always tell when he's not entirely happy in an environment, and I think that came through a little bit last year as the frustrations of the season and the performances wore on.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so quite a few older names are going out there, which I think it is a positive. Obviously, some big names there and some very experienced players, and as you've mentioned, legends of the club. But definitely, I think recognition that perhaps Brisbane needs a younger look about it. And that continues as we go through some of the contracts extended here. So Connor O'Toole, we've previously mentioned, has been signed on a 3-year deal. Now, I think Brisbane are starting to learn their lessons from the likes of Jamie McLaren and Brandon Borello, that they didn't have good young talent locked down to multiple year contracts. I think Brandon Borello made most of his senior side appearances still on a youth contract, which is crazy. But by the same token, it means if an international club comes calling, you probably don't get the revenue from a transfer fee that perhaps you would get. So Connor O'Toole signing 3 years. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's right. As a sort of indicator of a transfer fee that the club could potentially get for him, and also just having him contracted for 3 years, I think that's great. I think it's a sign of the of how the club see him as a sort of high potential player and the heir to that left back spot. If he sort of can make the step up and earn it, which personally I think he can. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing him this season.
Yeah, the next one is Matt Mackay, obviously a club legend. I believe the last foundation player from Brisbane Roar's first season still at the club and potentially still in the league. I'd have to go through line by line and have a look. He still looks pretty much the same he has for the last decade. What are your thoughts on Matt Mackay signing another year and obviously continuing on as captain?
Yeah, I think Matt can play for the club as long as he wants. I think he's earned that right. He's been our captain for a number of years now, and has one of the highest sort of appearances at the club as well. Sort of broken up by a stint away overseas. Yeah, I think he's earned that right. I think personally that he should have a statue of him outside of Suncorp when he retires, alongside all of the NRL greats that you see out there. Between him and Broish, I'd say. He can sort of play on for as long as he wants, and as long as he's sort of semi-useful, I'd say. I don't know if he'll be starting every game this season with the midfield that we have, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But I think he still has a big part to play, particularly with the leadership that he brings on pitch and off.
Yeah, definitely, and I think he's well respected throughout the league. He's been the chairman of the PFA for quite a few years, which I think speaks volume about the respect his opponents have for him as well. Do you see his role changing in any way? We did mention briefly his stint at Rangers and then also playing in Asia for a little bit. And also for the Socceroos, he's fulfilled more of a left back or left wing back role. With the departure of Corey Brown and some of the midfield talent we'll probably speak of in a moment, do you see his role changing in any way?
No, I definitely don't buy into the Matt Mackay as a makeshift left back at, I don't know, 36, 37 years old.
It's just the propaganda that I've been spreading throughout the league.
I think so. It's the in the mix of podcast propaganda, which I'm not buying one bit of. I think he will still play in his sort of base of midfield, or even a sort of holding midfield or number 8 role from time to time, but it'll be in a more limited capacity.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if that midfield structure changes with both Christensen fit and Matt Mackay in there as well. If you went back 3 or 4 years, that's an elite level left-footed, right-footed central midfield combination. But I'm not sure in 2018, 2019 if they will see that much game time together. But again, we don't really know until the team actually lines up. The next one, Jack Hingett, signing on a 2-year deal. He is now 26 or 27, I believe. What do you make of his contribution to the club since joining from North Queensland?
Yeah, I think Jack Hinkett's another one of those players like Corey Brown that's a very solid A-League level fullback, and I think Jack's improved season on season. He's definitely one of the fan favourites of the club as well. And I think, a 2-year deal, it shows that the club does value him. And I think, he's not going to be too challenged for that right back spot, which can be a good or a bad thing.
Yeah, now we've spoken about it before, but I think Stefan Negro is a great shout to challenge for that particular position. And I think the depth will do you well. Like, the worst thing you can see is when you get into that kind of squad element and I think Jack Hingett and Corey Brown for the last couple of years haven't really been challenged in those full-back positions. And without that competition for players or that steady competition for positions in a team, you can struggle a little bit. So we'll talk about Stefan Negro a little bit further on, but I don't mind Jack Hingett. He's not a bad player. The other two, and I'll loop these ones together, Daniel Bowles and Jacob Pepper, who for a long period last year were a makeshift centre-back pairing. What are your thoughts on those two?
I'm a big fan of Bowles. Shame that he had an injury, which I think really did hamper his development. I think it was last season when he got injured. I think he had a knee injury, or maybe the season before, but a recent injury that sort of took him out for an extended period of time when he was really just starting to break into the team on a more regular basis. I'd like to get a closer look at him this season to see how he's looking after that. I don't think he's, at least initially, going to be in the starting centre-back role. But I think that's where he'll be. You occasionally do see him deployed on a makeshift basis as a left back or a right back, but the centre back is really where he should be played.
It's because he's built like a giraffe. He just looks like a centre back.
Yeah. But I'm a fan. Whereas I can't say the same for Jacob Pepper. I think he's the Aussie Malik of the Roar. He's got the touch of a blacksmith, and he's a sort of a holding midfielder who's been fashioned into a makeshift centre back.
Yeah, and it's usually the other way. You have a centre back that you're not entirely confident in their touch, so you put them into midfield as an anchor. Whereas he's done the reverse. Obviously came through the Western Sydney Wanderers, playing largely in midfield. And it was only really in the last 12 months he's been turned into a centre back option.
That's right. Yeah, and I mean he did. To be honest, he does look decent. I was very worried when he first started to be sort of played there to plug a gap that we had due to injury. But he's accounted for himself quite well in that role, in that fill-in role from time to time. And so, look, as a squad player who can fill in from time to time in midfield and centre back, I'm comfortable. But any more than that from him, and I start to get worried.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you look at like the great A-League combinations, and even in Brisbane Roar's history, Matt Smith is a great example. You usually have, one stopper that steps to the ball and one cover that looks to drop off and clean everything else up. And I know Bowles and Pepper weren't the first choice central defenders, and they were covering injuries to the likes of Jade North and what's his name? Yeah, Luke De Vere, thank you. But it did look like they both kind of wanted to be the covering player, or they both wanted to step to the ball a little bit too much. And I know they're definitely just doing it as cover, and it's not their ideal or preferred positions. But
well,
it
as
made
you
it
say,
tough.
I think those two are covers, and then I think if we talk about the pair that probably will be the starting centre back pairing, Avram Papadopoulos and Luke De Vere, are both stoppers. So
Yeah,
I think there's probably a bit of a mismatch there in both cases, but obviously all the centre backs should be able to play together in theory, and we'll see what works.
yeah, and maybe it signals a bit of a formation shift or something to that effect, or a change in the structure from what we've seen with that flat back four. But time will only tell. And I think those really good elite level covering defenders, the likes of Alex Wilkinson, who's been phenomenal for the last few seasons, Matt Smith that we spoke about earlier, more recently Bart Shankeveld and Reece Williams for the two Melbourne sides, like they really are valuable. I think beyond just the position they play or the wage that they bring each week, it gives those defensive lines quite a bit of depth with that extra cover. So, yeah, interesting to see how it plays out. And you would hope that that central defensive area remains relatively injury-free this season. You did mention Luke De Vere. I've been a massive fan of him for a long time. But he's now 27. He's no longer that sort of, 21, 22-year-old prodigy that came through and got his move over to Asia. I think keeping him fit and keeping him available, even with these contracts we're talking about that have been extended, will be key to the Roar's success this season. So the next one we'll look at is Brendan White. I don't know a tremendous amount about Brendan. Have you seen much of his game?
No, to be honest, I haven't seen a lot of him either, and I don't think we will over the course of the season, because we don't have that. We don't have those cup games that you see in European leagues, filling out the season for those kind of players to get their chances. I think he picked up one or two games in pre-season, or at least sort of got minutes. But I haven't seen much of him and don't know a whole lot about him at all. I think he will spend most of the season on the bench.
And then the next one,
Jamie Young gets injured.
Yeah, definitely. And the next one, probably the opposite end of the spectrum, a player that everybody knows quite well up at Brisbane. Enrique, now 34 years old, did enough in his late season stint last year to get himself fit and get another year contract with the Roar.
Yeah, what a legend. I also love me some slippery fish. I think that he's still definitely got a role to play in the squad as well. I don't think he'll be starting games, and even in his at the end of his sort of first stint at the Roar, he was quite the impact sub. So I think he's still got something left to give.
Is he naturalised now? Is he an Australian player?
Yeah, he is.
I think that makes it a little bit less of a burden. Like, I don't necessarily think you would ever, and no disrespect to Enrique, I know he's a friend of the show, I'm probably listening, but I don't think you would want to give him an international visa position. But certainly as a naturalised player that you can include in your Australian quota, probably good experience and depth to have.
100%.
The next one's Brett Holman. He actually comes inside the salary cap within the wage budget, signing a one-year contract extension. What did you make of his contribution last year? Obviously didn't play as many games as I think he would have liked. And probably you'd say one of the better performers last year from a Brisbane perspective.
Yeah, I think he was one of the better performers, and it's good to see that he is, even at his current age, he's still sort of hungry for games and frustrated when he's not playing as much as he would like, which I think is great, and I think that shows that he's not just collecting a paycheck and he still wants to contribute to the team, and I think that's probably why he earned himself another contract extension. But I also do agree with the way that he was managed last season, because you could see that when he wasn't playing as many minutes, or he didn't have to play as much, or when he did come on from the bench, he's still a quality player who can pick a pass and shoot from outside the box if given space. So I definitely think he's also got something that he can bring to the team.
I think one of the things that we you can only really speculate about it unless you're involved in the club or unless they release financial information, but it'd be intriguing to see if he had, like a large appearance fee as part of his wage or part of his contract, and if that buys into, his desires for playing time. It's one of those things that you kind of only consider if you're playing Football Manager or trying to sign someone on FIFA.
Yeah, you've got like 10 appearance bonus and they're sitting on 9.
Yeah, so we were talking about... in our Sydney season preview, with which, if you are listening, you'll have to go and check out on the channel, we were talking about some of the goal and assist bonuses that are built into contracts and how some of them work. It'd be intriguing to see if Brett Holman's contract last year was largely tied to receiving, most of his wage on the weeks in which he played, given his relative age. The next one, Nick D'Agostino has signed a 1-year contract extension. What do you make of Nick D'Agostino? He looks like he wants to be playing as a striker. He used more in wide roles last year as a bit of a stopgap. Still only 21 years old, so there is room for him to improve and grow, and came through that Brisbane Academy. But what are your thoughts on him?
I personally am a fan. I love Daggers. I think he did a great job, and it was looking like he was going to really break out in the 16-17 season when he was sort of coming off the bench for Macca every now and again. He was scoring some good goals. He was looking like he was having a really good impact. But I think something happened, and he sort of didn't look like he was up for it as much, and his development sort of stalled. And now we've got Dylan Wenzel-Halls coming to the team, which we'll get to as well. I think if he's not careful, and if it hasn't happened already, that Wenzel-Halls is sort of going to usurp him in that role of sort of jumping on and being the backup to the main number 9. So hopefully he can continue to stay hungry and push for a spot.
He must be doing something well, because Joey Katabian is obviously playing in the National Premier League down here in Victoria, getting paid pretty decent money at Avondale at present, and had a great FFA Cup run. He's been a highly touted prospect and an Australian youth international for a long time, and the preference was to re-sign D'Agostino instead of him, and then also letting Corey Gamero go, who has pretty decent experience in this league and is still relatively young as far as backup strikers go. They must have relatively big raps on him to continually be giving him these extensions and these contracts.
So now hopefully we'll see some more of that this season.
Yeah, fingers crossed. You can only hope. So now we get to move to the exciting ones, the players in. I think there's definitely a correlation between sides that struggled last year trying to sign 10 and 11 players, and the teams that perhaps made the finals but are just looking to tweak and improve, where you've only really seen like 5 or 6 players come in. And that's certainly the case for Roar. They've brought 6 in, but if you go through them, they're all high quality. Starting firstly with Stefan Mork, who's joined from NEC Nijmegen in the Eredivisie, and not just joining from a top 5, top 6 European league, but also for a transfer fee for £135,000. We kind of spoke about the Bakri group earlier in this league. What do you think it means, not just that Stefan Mork has joined, who we'll talk about him as a player, but the fact that they are actually out there in the world and paying transfer fees now?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of management of the club by the Bakris, a couple of seasons ago, you had players who weren't even getting paid their wages in the off season or their super contributions, and now you've got not only the players getting paid. We've got sponsors, shirt sponsors and the like, all ready to go before day one of the season. But now we're starting to reach out again for and pay transfer fees. On the one hand, relative to the management of the club in the past by the Bakris, this is great. But when you think about it, it's still a bit frustrating in terms of the club management. This should be the bare minimum that any a professional club in the A-League should really expect. And a club like Brisbane, who wants to be one of the top clubs in the league and sort of sees themselves as, being one of the most successful and sort of storied clubs in the league, this should just be the bare minimum that we're expecting. But look, Stefan Mork, I really rate him. I think he's an excellent signing for the club. They've brought him in on a 4-year deal from NEC, so I think that says a lot about what the club see in him.
Yeah, and I think even though they've paid a fee for him, he still has such high potential and is still only 23 that we could see a similar move to a Daniel Arzani or an Aaron Moy, where if he continues to perform at a high level and gets himself in and around the Socceroos squads, which I do think he's capable of, you could definitely see a pretty decent return on that investment in the years to come.
Agree.
So the next one is Stefan Negro. We briefly mentioned him earlier. A pretty versatile defensive player, and I think you've noted in pre-season he's been playing at the base of midfield as well. Joining from Melbourne Victory after coming through their youth ranks, he's a Ballarat boy in regional Victoria. He's moved up to Brisbane to try and get more game time. Realistically, realistically, what are your thoughts on him as a player, and how do you think he'll go trying to crack into a starting 11?
Yeah, look, I don't know a whole lot about Negro to be honest, but yeah, and I do know that he's a utility, and that's part of the reason that he's been brought into the squad. But to be honest, I think his best shout to break into the squad, as I think you mentioned earlier, was in the fullback roles to push either Hingett or O'Toole for a spot. I don't know whether he can play on the left or not, but I think those are his best two options, right? Because I think at the moment, and we'll sort of come to talk about the midfield overall, and Brisbane, for the first time in quite a while, I've got quite a bit of depth in midfield at the moment, whereas they don't as much in the fullback positions. I think that's his best shout to break into the team, and I think he will be utilised at first as a sort of in a bench role, sort of coming on, getting minutes here and there. But yeah, look, if he does well, I think that's probably the way in for him.
Yeah, he had some really good games last year, particularly one against us that springs to mind, where he was very, very good across that defensive line. I think he played at left back in that game. And then also another great fullback performance against Sydney FC. And I think some of the frustration comes from, and we can go through this further in the Melbourne Victory season preview, but that Kevin Muscat consistently reverts to type and just puts his strongest 11 out there when it's available, regardless of who's been doing well. And I think that caused a bit of frustration with him, that he was performing at a high level when called upon, but then when everyone was fit again, he was straight back onto the substitutes bench, which I'm sure is frustrating for any young player.
Yeah, he played against us in that match that I was recalling earlier from last season, where we beat the Victory at home, and I thought he was one of their best on ground.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting one to see. I think he's quality, and I think he may push Jack into a little bit further than perhaps you do, but obviously you've got the far more educated opinion on Brisbane over the last few years. So the next one, Dylan Wenzel-Halls has joined from the Western Pride. He's been absolutely smashing goals in the Queensland NPL competition. Have you caught much of his game so far?
I have seen him once in pre-season in the Roar's game away against the Melbourne Victory in Morwell. He did get some minutes late on in that game and looked very sharp coming on for Adam Taggart. Yeah, I think if he can get minutes here and there and maybe score a couple of goals, I think he'll keep his confidence up and do very well for himself, and maybe even look to push Taggart. And I'm hoping that's the idea. So yeah, it'd be great to see him get some minutes this season.
Well, I think you've already just kind of introduced him as well, but Adam Taggart obviously being the big off-season signing, the earliest off-season signing. Bit of a cloud around the way that he left Perth. Apparently he's left them a little bit in the lurch, where he didn't tell them he was going to let his contract run out, and he didn't tell them he was joining Brisbane. But obviously a really great pedigree. Won the Golden Boot with Newcastle Jets in what was a very poor Newcastle team, scoring some great goals and dragging them through a season. Before getting a big money move to Fulham that didn't really work out that well for him. He also went out on loan to Scotland and couldn't really find consistent football or consistent form. Still, despite limited appearances last year against the likes of Andy Keogh and Diego Castro and Chris Harold, managed to be Perth's leading goal scorer last year. What are your thoughts on him as a signing, and how important do you think it is to get back to a player more in that Jamie McLaren type mould that has been so successful for Brisbane?
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic signing to bring in someone like Taggart, who should be, after a season last year with the Glory, which was sort of marred a little bit by injury, and I think that's another thing that the Glory were a little bit dirty about, that they'd sort of rehabbed him and then without communicating it properly, or whatever they're alleging, that he's sort of been brought over to Brisbane after they've put in the investment in him to sort of rehab him and bring him back. No, I think it's a coup for us to get him, and I think with the right service around him, with Botiak having had a good pre-season now and looking very sharp, and Mickelson you'd expect on the other side, hopefully he bangs in a lot of goals, and he's already been scoring goals in pre-season, so I think it's boding very well, and I think a key striker was very, very high on the list of off-season priorities for us, and yeah, I'm very pleased with it.
Yeah, great player. It'll be interesting to see if he returns to former form. Interestingly enough, he's one of the few players in the league that actually have image rights deals because he's sponsored by Nike and involved in a couple of their marketing campaigns. He's not allowed to get haircuts and things like that because they don't want the posters and stuff that he's a part of to ever get aged, which is just an interesting note that appeared while I was putting this together. I think Bruno Fornaroli is another one. And there's a couple other players dotted around clubs as well that aren't allowed to dye their hair or change their facial hair or anything like that for the course of the season.
Yeah, I was wondering why the buzz cut, but yeah, okay, I understand that now.
Yeah, so I think it came up initially. There was like a charity fundraiser for Ben Kennedy, and Adam Taggart was initially going to be involved in shaving his head, and then it came out that he wasn't allowed to due to his image rights deal. So yeah, just an interesting, unique tidbit for any Brisbane fans that are listening.
Yeah, a bit of trivia.
Yeah, so the next one, Tobias Mikkelsen, the Dane has joined from Norgeland. I've probably butchered that pronunciation and I apologise to all our Danish fans. But looks to be a decent addition. He did play in the FA Cup game against Melbourne City. Have you caught any more of his pre-season and where do you think he'll slot into the team so far?
Yeah, so I did catch a bit of him in that game away at Morwell against the Victory. And he started that game and played on the left wing. He looks quite quality. His balls into the box look to be quite good. He looks like a decent crosser of the ball. Looks like he still has a bit of energy. I know that he can play in the 10 role as well. And he looks to be quite handy on set pieces as well. We're sort of alternating the set piece duties with Eric Botiak at the time. So yeah, I think he looks like another handy addition in a key area that in terms of the system that John Aloisi looks to be trying to play. So haven't seen a lot of him other than that, and other than his little highlight reel. But yeah, he looks like he could be a decent player.
Yeah, Scandinavian players are very hit and miss. They're probably about 50-50 on how they work out in the league. For every Thomas Sorensen, Michael Jakobsen, Johan Absalonsen that we saw last season, there's always like Alexander Coco that played at Newcastle. But yeah, fingers crossed for the league itself that we get another high quality recruit. And I think if you can get him firing, and Bortiak obviously with a full pre-season under his belt, there's going to be some quality delivery for Adam Taggart to put away. Now the other one, and we spoke about him previously, but Alex Lopez, we didn't really know much about him when we last spoke, but then in the last probably 24 to 48 hours, his social media presence has exploded. He's a Sporting Gijon midfielder. He's brought his entire family down here, including both his parents, to live in Brisbane. So he's definitely involved for the long haul. What are your thoughts on him as a player, and how do you think he'll slot into the existing Brisbane setup?
Yeah, I love him already, especially after all that stuff that we've seen on social media in the past 24 to 48 hours. Yeah, look, he's another one who I hadn't heard of before him coming over, but yeah, he's at 30 years old, after playing 7 years for Celta Vigo in La Liga, and also a successful stint at Sheffield Wednesday on loan where they almost went up. He looks to be a very sort of technical, energetic midfield, which will complement the existing midfield of sort of Mackay, Thomas Christensen, Holman, and Coletti as well quite well. I'm really uppish on our midfield at the moment, and I think he's going to add some real quality and technical play there.
That's probably a good note. When you read them out like that, of that sort of midfield six, and then you add Stefan Mork into it as well, how do you see them lining up this year?
Yeah, I think there'll be a lot of competition for spots, which again is a good thing. Look, my first inkling is that they'll probably play a 4-3-3 so that they can play Mikkelsen and Eric Botiak high up on the wings, getting balls into Taggart, and also sort of cutting in themselves from time to time. So I think the three in midfield you'd expect, if all fit and firing, would be Christensen, Mork, and Alo. With Mackay featuring every other game, starting every other game, and certainly coming in off the bench, and Coletti looking to sort of fight for spots as well. But like you can't argue with the quality that those players bring. It's funny because it continues John Aloisi's fascination with Spanish midfielders. So yeah, here's to hoping he's going to be more Corona than Hervas.
Yeah, more Corona than Aranya, who I don't think we ever actually saw play a game for anybody.
May he remain nameless. Yeah.
And I appreciate that you snuck ALO in there as well. If you haven't set up some sort of T-shirt or commemorative print, you should definitely get onto Etsy and get that one sorted just in case it kicks off.
That's right. Word is that he's going to have the ALO chant going to the tune of the Red Hot Chili Peppers song.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, the
that's
Brisbane
word
Roar
around the fan group.
Yeah, the Brisbane Roar Melbourne Supporters Club already hard at work with their musical covers.
We've got our own chant separate from the rest of the club, so we're going to have to do something special for him.
All right, fair enough. I'll leave that one to you and local celebrity Durga Ong to figure out.
Oh yeah. It's Durga TV now.
Durga TV, that's very, very true. The next one, the marquee signing for the season. There is still one space available, but Eric Bortiak obviously came into the league last season with a tremendous pedigree, having spent a lot of his youth career and senior career at Lille in League One. What are your thoughts on him, and how much do you think an entire pre-season this year is going to benefit him coming into the new season?
Yeah, I am. I'm a big fan of Eric Bortiak. I think that he will be the first to admit that last season, as it was in being interrupted from coming back from injury and not having had a full pre-season with the club, trying to sort of fit into a squad that was itself adjusting to a real shift in demographic that we saw last season. I think, he would be the first to admit that he was probably only firing on sort of 50% of his capacity. So I think this season you'll really see that class that he has on a much more consistent basis. In the game that I saw him playing in at Morwell, he looked to be linking up very well with Hingett on the wings, Hingett making overlapping runs, and those two really sort of looking for each other, as well as Christensen sort of feeding him balls from the midfield. So he looks like he's going to be very key to what the Roar do going forward.
Yeah, pretty mercurial looking talent. You can tell he's got that capacity in him to do something out of nowhere. It's just whether it was more fitness or form related in terms of how often he produced it last year. But fingers crossed for the league itself that he can kind of get firing, because a very exciting player when he's doing some of the things that he's capable of. So the next one, Matt Mackay, we did briefly touch on him. He will continue the season as captain. There is a leadership group underneath him as well from a couple other players. We have already highlighted his perhaps potentially reduced role, or perhaps potentially fullback role, depending on your opinion. How important do you think his leadership's been to Brisbane Roar, not just over the times when they've been really successful, but in the years since when things haven't been as easy as previous years?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've just hit the nail on the head there. I think his leadership, especially on field in times where things aren't going well, he's one of those people that you can see just comes on and steadies the ship and calms everyone down when they need it, and shouts at everyone when they need it. He's sort of he's certainly an on-field leader that knows how to how and when to do those things, and we've all seen his sort of off-field leadership as well. So I think he's someone who's very important to the club, both on and off the field.
Yeah, I think a decent shout there. Now the next one, and this could be a podcast on its own entirely, the current manager John Aloisi and current assistant Ross Aloisi. What have you made the Aloisi brothers in their time at the club, and what do you think the expectations are for them this season?
Yeah, so I guess coming into, I think it's his fourth season now, I'm still not sure, to be honest, what he's all about. I don't know what the identity of at least the kind of football that the Roar play really are under him. Obviously, that's the identity in terms of the football we play has been distinctly lacking, I guess, since the Roarcelona era under Ange Postecoglou. Where we played really attractive tiki-taka possession-based football. Look, I still have faith that he's sort of the right man for the job this season, and I'm really interested to see, as an ex-striker himself, what he can get out of Taggart, who's as you mentioned, much more in the mould of Jamie McLaren than a Massimo Macaroni was. So yeah, look, I'm hoping that with the recruits he's brought in and with the balance he's brought back to the squad, he can sort of mix up his style of play and system a little bit more. He's previously, in seasons gone by, been a little bit one note and a little bit predictable, but I'm hoping that we see more energetic, sort of dynamic style of play. when we need, fast transitions when we need, and really holding the ball and putting the foot down when we need as well. So I think this season will be instructive about what kind of a manager Aloisi is going to be and where his career is going. I think it's a real critical point in his managerial career.
Yeah, and I think he's probably keen to shake some of the stigma around him. The long-running one being that it's Ross that actually calls the shots, and John's just more, the public face and the one doing the media interviews and whatever else. I do think he kind of listens to criticism, whether that's either a positive or a negative, or whether he moves swiftly enough. Because I think one of the big ones that came through last year consistently was that they had an older team, albeit a team with great quality, but they were still trying to play that sort of aggressive counter-attacking style that they had the previous year with entirely different personnel. And it does look like he has tried to make adjustments in the transfer market to get a younger, perhaps more mobile team. But you can't just revert back to type. You can't do back-to-back thirds, then finish sixth, and just go back to doing exactly what you did when you were third. It's not really progression, more a regression. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of tactical tweaks they make, if the style changes in any way now that they are a little bit more mobile, and how they continue to progress as a management duo. Right, so the next one, the one to watch. Who do you think will be either a breakout player or the player most likely to set the league on fire this season?
Well, I think those are different questions. Well, I'd certainly answer them in different ways, because if I had to pick a breakout player, for me, it would either be Connor O'Toole or Dylan Wenzel-Halls. I think either one or both of them are in for a real breakout season this year. Probably more likely to be Connor O'Toole, just given the lack of depth at fullback, and he's really got an opportunity to make that role his own and really sort of supercharge his development this season. That opportunity is there for him. But in terms of who's going to really light the league on fire for us, I'd say it's going to have to be Taggart. He's going to be the focal point. If he can stay fit for the most of the season, he's got a fit and firing Boetiak around him, and he's got the quality of Mickelson getting balls into him as well. He's got a really great platform to kick on and try and push back into Socceroos contention.
Yeah, I think it's a good problem to have, but I think there's a couple at Brisbane that you'd say are players that have for quite a while been rated as good players or good prospects, but in reality probably aren't involved in the conversation as being elite level talent. The likes of Luke De Vere, Stefan Mork in particular, Adam Taggart. I think the expectations for those three is to make that jump from being a good player to being an elite level talent within the division. And they definitely have enough between the three of them to do it. But it'll be interesting to see if they can take their games to another level with sort of increased importance within their squads and within their teams. So the next one, the one to hate. Who is everybody going to rock up to watch Brisbane so that they can boo the living shit out of?
That's easy. That's definitely going to be Stefan Mork. I think having watched him play over the previous seasons that he was in the A-League, and also seeing him down at the Melbourne Victory pre-season game that I saw, he was very much involved in getting in the faces of the Victory players, and there was almost a bit of an on-field brawl that broke out after he was getting up in the face of one of the Victory players. So I definitely think he's one that we're going to be happy to have playing with us instead of against us.
Yeah, he definitely has that fire and that passion. It's a good tribute to have. Yeah, it's a shame that he left Melbourne City, but you can kind of see that they were moving in a different direction. But I just think back when he initially left and came back with Adelaide, and there was a big tunnel melee where a bunch of assistant coaches started going at him for whatever reason. So he definitely kind of plays the game on that knife edge that so many players do. And my dishonourable mention, I guess, for the one to hate is Abraham Papadopoulos. Obviously, the spitting incident last year didn't cover himself in glory. He's a quality player when he's at his best, but he just always seems to have that element about him, like he may get sent off for something ridiculous at any minute. So it'll be interesting to see how those two coexist this season and which one ends up being, the bigger shithouse. And I do love shithousery. I think it's fantastic. All right, so the big question, 6 last year, they've re-signed a lot of the same people, the likes of, Mackay, Hingett, Bowles, Pepper. Are the club at risk of stagnating and becoming what is essentially a middle-of-the-road team?
No, I don't think so. Last season, if you'd asked me that, I wouldn't have been too sure. But I'm impressed with the off-field dealings that we've done this season. We've not only recruited in quality players, more towards that sort of peak of their career in key positions, obviously such as Taggart in the striking role. You've got Mork as a really quality number 8. And obviously Botiak and Mickelson as well, which are key areas for us. But we've also cleared out a number of the over 35 brigade and the rest of the over 35 brigade or thereabouts that we've chosen to sort of keep on. I think you'll see this season that they'll play more of a bench role or their minutes will be more limited, whereas last season they were really relied on a lot more than you'd sort of want at this level. And we've also looking to bring up a number of young players as well. So I think that the squad is very balanced. And I think in typical Brisbane Roar style, we've brought in names that aren't your sort of proven match winners that people know from around the world, that I think people will be surprised in the quality that they bring and their sort of ability to win games. So I think we're sitting very well at the moment.
Yeah, a decent shout. Now, the other one, the elephant in the room, we have kind of touched on it a little bit. Obviously, the backer group, if we're focusing on some of the negative aspects of their tenure, will their ownership issues, the late payments, the lack of superannuation payments, show up again this season if the club isn't performing at a high level?
Well, I bloody hope not. I mean, you never know with ownership groups. I don't. My sense is that that's not going to be linked to whether we do well on the field or not. But if it does happen, you'd think that it would affect on-field performance as it has in the past. As I mentioned before, the fact that David Poole has come back to take the sort of top job at the club, I think is a good indicator that relations between the club and the Backeries are better than they have been, certainly. And so I think that's all you can really take. And the fact that the club's reached into their pocket in the off season to make some key signings, pay transfer fees, extend contracts, and the club's really looking like it's got its shit together. So I think that's the best you can hope for. And so I'd say, yeah, it's probably not going to be an issue this season, but touch wood.
Yeah, I think if you're giving him the benefit of the doubt, some of the off-season moves they've made in terms of paying transfer fees, all that sort of stuff, aggressively bringing in high-quality talent from other teams in the division as well as international players as well, you'd like to give them benefit of the doubt and see themselves being on track. But it'll be interesting to see if because they've made those investments and they've had that extra outlay, if expectations increase and they start getting annoyed with either management or David Poole, who we've mentioned a little bit as well. If they start, if expectations are now increased on those people to perform at that high level and get back to challenging for championship football. So the next one, obviously we're a week out from the season beginning. If there are fans that are on the fence or fans similar to yourself that are based in other capital cities, why should they get back around the Roar? What's your membership pitch? And if you have one, a membership slogan?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, it's a great time to get back involved in the Roar, particularly after the season we had last year. There's a massive buzz around the club at the moment. Obviously, we had a very successful kit launch this season with sort of hundreds of fans getting out to the new training facilities in Logan, which themselves will obviously look to improve the performance of the players. It's great for them to have a dedicated facility. Hopefully, that'll go some ways to avoiding injuries throughout the club. Look, I'd say particularly if you're on the East Coast, there are Brisbane Roar away fan groups in each of those cities. It's a great atmosphere to get down to games away, and Suncorp's going to be a bit of a fortress again this season. So I'd say, definitely get out there.
Yeah, a decent shout as well. And I think you kind of touched on something that we haven't really mentioned. The move to the new training facility is obviously going to be huge for the club as well. For those of you listening that are unfamiliar, previously training at the Ballymore ground, which is the home of Queensland Rugby Union. Obviously playing on a rugby union pitch, a thick, heavy venue prioritised entirely for the Queensland Reds and their season. How big an impact do you think the move to a new training facility will have on the Roar and their success?
Yeah, look, personally, I think it's going to be massive. And last season in particular, I think you saw that we had a mini injury crisis last season where a number of players were going down with injuries, and the club was sort of pointing to the training facilities that they had as one of the main contributing factors to that. And I think it can't be not only for the actual surface that the players are training on, but also just to give a sense of professionalism to the club that they've got their own top class training facilities, and they're not having to go pick balls out of the creek at the back of Ballymore or whatever. Like, I think it's going to go a long way, and I think you are going to see that translate to on pitch performance.
Yeah, I don't think it's a coincidence that the last few years of the club as it's sort of increased each year in professionalism. The clubs that have permanent and high quality training facilities, the City Football Academy, the Sydney FC grounds that they use at Valentine Park, even Melbourne Victory's Gosh's paddock setup, and the fact that they use Amy Park for a lot of their training games and things. I do think that shows through on the quality of training, the quality of club facilities and training facilities and pitches is shining through now across the league and final standings, perhaps more than ever.
Absolutely.
So the next one, season expectations. Realistically, where do you think the Brisbane Roar are aiming for, and where do you think they can finish?
I'm pretty bullish. I see us finishing second, and I see us pushing deep into finals, potentially going down in a semi, or really pushing for that grand final.
Interesting. I think that one is tied directly to the form of Mr. Adam Taggart and how well he can finish opportunities this season. But there's certainly the framework there, definitely. Continuing that on and applying it to like a league-wide perspective, who is your prediction to actually finish first? And who do you think is going to be the big struggler this year and the favourite for the wooden spoon?
I think Melbourne Victory are going to finish first. They've brought in those real sort of household names in Ola Toivonen and Keisuke Honda, as well as just having a really solid squad as it is, particularly quality attacking third that they have. They're always going to be a threat. Their back line will be their biggest sort of question mark, but I think the Victory are more often than not going to outscore their opponents.
Yeah, they do potentially, and everyone's breaking my damn heart in these podcasts and picking them to do well, but they do potentially look a little bit top-heavy, but it's an incredible top, so it's hard to say if they're willing to accept beating everybody 4-3 each week. It's going to be tough to stop the various different attacking forces that they have. So, yeah, probably not the worst shout in the world. What makes you think that Sydney will perhaps potentially drop down lower than Brisbane?
Sydney, look, you've got a new manager coming in. That can always go one of two ways for a club. Graham Arnold, I think, had that squad playing really great football. As much as I hate to say it, I'm not the biggest Graham Arnold fan, but I think he had them playing well, and he really had the dressing room throughout most of his tenure there. They've lost some pretty key players. While I haven't been following Sydney too closely during the off-season, they've had a bit of squad rotation and manager rotation. I think it's going to catch up with them this season.
Yeah, I think a decent shout, and I'm going to try and get away from it this season. I'm not a massive fan of Graham Arnold or even Postecoglou, but it would be foolish to not respect their achievements and the way they get their teams operating. Like, as much as I didn't like Postecoglou, his Brisbane Roar side that won all those championships was phenomenal. And even though I'm not a massive Graham Arnold fan either, you can't underestimate his influence and the way that he got players to buy into the way that they were playing and their style and their roles within the teams. And it'll be interesting to see how that one plays out. But if you want to go through it further, you'll have to listen into our very, very long Sydney FC season preview. So last one, round one fixture. You are playing Central Coast Mariners on Sunday at home. What is your score prediction for that match? And if you want to add another cherry to it, who do you think will be the scorers?
I think it's going to be 2-1 to us at home win to kick off the season. I think that Taggart will get on the score sheet. and I think that Botiak will get on the score sheet as well. For the Mariners, I think it's going to be McCormack, and I think Bolt will get minutes and have a contract by then.
Oh, that's an extra cherry on top.
That's a bold prediction. Put your house on it, listeners.
It's a bold prediction. It'll be interesting to see if he is signed and if he is brought in, if it's as a marquee player, because you'd assume, being who he is and the commercial investment that will come with him, if he can garner that level of wage, or if he'll take a relatively modest salary to fulfill his dream of being a professional footballer and be within the cap. I think the biggest indicator as to how highly they rated him is the fact that they signed Tommy Orr, who will likely also play left wing, in the last few weeks of the off season. So yeah, be very interesting to see. I don't think he did his chances any harm last night. I thought the first goal wasn't a terrible finish. You can't really.
It was not a bad finish.
You can't help who you're playing against. That's not his fault. That's an NPL side. He still did his thing.
He had to round a couple of traffic cones to put it in. But,
he did.
The keeper
he
could
did.
have done more at the near post, but it was a very nice finish.
And if Jamie Young had to let that one wriggle under him, you'd have been screaming at the TV as well. But
absolutely.
Yeah, the only thing that I think is perhaps counting against him is that he still hasn't gotten through 90 minutes. And as a footballer at any level, if you can't get through a full game, a professional contract does seem to be a little bit beyond his grasp. So I'm not entirely sure it'll happen in the first few weeks, but I do think that they've kind of backed themselves into a corner with his performance and the fact that he scored those goals. Because it's up on like ESPN SoccerNet's international website. It's on the Who Ate All the Pies stuff. It's all over the footballing world at the moment. I do think they will have to give him a contract, if not at the start of the season, certainly before the season's end.
Yeah, SoccerNet loves Bolt Watch though.
They love Bolt Watch. I think they're going to launch their own streaming service that's just following him around Gosford.
Yep.
Anyway, Colby, thank you so much for joining me, man. I've really enjoyed the chat. I think Brisbane, perhaps more so than any other club, is responsible for taking the league and its overall quality and standard to another level from that phenomenal team they had at the start of this decade. It would be good to see them hit those heights again, get back to challenging for the top of the division. The league only gets better the more competitive it becomes, and it only gets better with a higher quality of football. So fingers crossed they can start reliving some of the glory days and hit that level again this year. Thank you so much for joining me. I really do appreciate it. Do you want to give a couple of your own, Twitters, podcasts, things like that, a plug?
Yeah, why not? Look, I'm pretty easy to find on Twitter, Colby _list on Twitter. You can also, if there are any Roar fans out there in Melbourne, you can get around us on Twitter or Facebook at Roar Fans in Melbourne. And if you can't get enough football podcast chat, you can also catch my podcast, More Than a Game podcast. That's on iTunes, Spotify, Facebook and Twitter.
And there will be links to each of those pages in the description below. If you are watching on YouTube, we are at @InTheMixer_podcast, on SoundCloud at @InTheMixer_podcast, and available to follow on Twitter at @InTheMixer_pod, because we ran out of characters on that handle. But more than anything, guys, thank you so much for listening, and I will see you guys again in the Mixer.